So I just thank you and want to welcome you here to the Praxis Circle interview.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be part of this really inspiring project.
Well, worldview is a tough subject to get across, and so we'll relate it to worldview as we go through a little bit here. So my first question is, I tried not to be too specific, but I did my homework on your background. But I suspect that your family background, going back a generation or two, is part of the reason you're here. Is that wrong, as an expert in free speech, civil rights?
I think each individual picks and chooses elements from their family background that resonates with them. I have a sibling, a brother, who is not a human rights activist, who doesn't share my values, has other passions that he relates to other aspects of the family history. So, I mean, a scientist might have a scientific answer to this, Doug. I think there was something in me that was always supportive of and seeking of individual liberty. And as I got older and learned about various aspects of my family background, and learned in particular that very close relatives, including both of my parents, had been deprived of very fundamental human rights simply because of who they were or what they believed, it became even more clear to me than ever that it would be a mission to try to make those free choices available to everybody, regardless of identity and regardless of ideology.
I know that family is important to you. It's behind what you just said, and so we're always trying to get a little info up front before we get to the stuff to try and figure out, well, where is this person's worldview?
I know. You asked me a rather abstract question that I'll answer it very concretely. I mean, very resonant with me is the fact that I only learned when I was a teenager. So it obviously hadn't affected my earlier inclinations toward civil liberties, but when I was a teenager, my mother told me that my father was a Holocaust survivor. I had not known that. As is true of many survivors, he did not want to talk about it, or indeed, I suspect, even acknowledge it. And it was really quite shocking to me to learn. And only, as time has gone by, I keep learning more details about how horrifically he and other members of his family suffered. And I think a way that they try to mute the impact of the suffering is to deny it, and psychologists would probably say that's not healthy, it doesn't work. But I learned that my father, who was born to a, as far as he knew, a Lutheran family, he was raised as a Lutheran in Germany. It turned out that his mother was what under Hitler's Nuremberg laws was called a Jew of the second degree, or a half Jew. I mean, my father was a Jew. So I learned when I was a teenager that my father, who had been raised as a Lutheran and was very devout in his Christianity, he celebrated Christmas and knew all the Christmas songs and loved all of the rituals. I learned that his family background on his mother's side was Jewish. Her family he was born in Germany in 1922. His mother's parents had converted because even then it was so stigmatizing to be a Jew. So she was raised already as a Lutheran. She married my grandfather, who was under Hitler's vile racist Nuremberg laws, an Aryan. And that was also very controversial. He was pressured by, especially when the Nazis came to power, to divorce her. To his credit, he refused to do that. His own sister, who joined the Nazi Party, would never speak to her sister-in-law, my grandmother. who managed to survive the war in semi-hiding in Berlin, as was true for a number of Jews. My father had been anti-Hitler politically, for that even as a teenager. For that reason, and also because of his mixed heritage, he was imprisoned at the Buchenwald forced labor camp. Now, it wasn't a death camp, but the Nazis' strategy was to kill people through work. The phrase in German was Zerstörung durch Arbeit, literally to destroy through work, and he almost died through the backbreaking labor and the horrible malnutrition and diseases that were rampant. I also learned, again, I think I was in my 20s when my father disclosed to me that he had been scheduled for sterilization by the Nazis. They had a program of eugenocide as well as genocide, and my father, being a doubly undesirable, literally had a date for the sterilization procedure. And one day before it was to take place, he was liberated by the American military. So I always am so grateful when I have the opportunity to speak to military audiences. I've spoken at all of the military academies. I believe that the work that they are doing, the service they provide, is an essential bedrock for civil liberties, for life itself as well as liberty, and I know that they all take an oath or affirmation to uphold the Constitution, which is what I've been devoting my life to in a very different way. On my mother's side, she came from an immigrant family, from her mother from Italy, her father from what is now Croatia. They were very impoverished, but they were also, to a certain extent, political and religious dissidents, particularly on my grandfather's side. That said, my grandfather, everybody has blind spots. My grandfather was very discriminatory when it came to his views about women, and he was very rigid in not allowing my mother to pursue higher education and dictating to her that she had to get married and have children. So I saw a woman who was brilliant and ambitious, but her ambitions had been thwarted because of her gender. My father, when he came to this country as a refugee, had to do what he had to do to earn a living and actually send some money back to Germany for his remaining relatives who had not been killed there. So both of them were deprived of basic freedoms of choice, and I never take for granted for 1 second that they and this country have provided me with the incredible luxury of liberty, and including a liberty to pursue my interests and my professional ambitions.
Well, what I'm hearing is, in a way, beautiful, typical Americans.
Yeah.
And
when I first
I'm
met
going to have a hard time with that too.
When I first met my husband, he said, "So what's your family background?" And I said, "Well, on my mother's side, Italian Catholic, married to a Croatian who was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. Very proud of that. Yeah. He was a Marxist. And on my father's side, quote, Aryan, German, Lutheran, married to a Jew." And my husband looked at me and he said, "In other words, you're a typical American, all mixed up."
Yeah,
and
all
I
mixed
love
up.
that. I love that.
I know
about
I
our
have
country.
Jewish blood, and I know, it's anything past this generation is. But what you speak of is so beautiful because, for example, I think of my similar grandparents. They had nothing like that, of course, but they were typical Depression era people who don't brag about anything. They don't even want to talk about what they've accomplished or experienced. They're tough. They knew people that fought in the Civil War. I mean, come on. That's how far back we go with just 1 or 2 generations. We're all of a sudden 100 and 150 years back.